Hi, I believe we're live now. I hope this works out technologically wise. We've had a few hiccups at the beginning, but I want to really warmly welcome everybody to this meeting on the Mother and Babies Home Bill that we've been discussing. In fact, they're still discussing it in the Dáil there. Very, very interesting discussion we've been having tonight. And all obviously the whole area of mother and baby homes and the legacy of the church and state in this country is absolutely massive. It's huge. And we've seen volumes and volumes of reports and testimonies and tribunals and all sorts of things over the many decades. And we are still witnessing, I honestly believe, this is an attempt by the state to cover up for its sins and the sins of the Catholic Church and indeed other churches in the past. Um, so I know most people who are in here tonight are interested in this in the very least, but also that many of you have been there and done that, or what they call survivors. I like to think of you in many ways as heroes, and particularly over the last couple of weeks when you have been really pushing members of the Oireachtas to sit up and take note of what's going on. We have never ever received the volume of emails and calls that we received in the last 2 weeks from you guys out there who've been really pushing hard to get this thing dealt with uh, in a fair manner, um, to stop the Dáil rushing through legislation, to ensure that that legislation is fully transparent, that justice is done for the survivors and for the future, and indeed for those who are no longer with us, those who have passed away. It's a very complex area, and they've made it even more complex with their laws that they are trying to use to basically lock away all of the files, all of the testimonies, all of the records that were gathered by the Mother and Baby Home Commission since 2015. And the idea of locking them away for 30 years just doesn't bear thinking about. Could you imagine if, after the Second World War, the German government tried to bury all records of the Holocaust and the sort of reaction there would have been? And in a way, and this is not to minimise the scale and the utter outrageous history and legacy of the Holocaust, but this, in a way, is Ireland's Holocaust. And I'll just make that point before I introduce the two guests. And then, as the meeting goes on, what I hope to do is to let the guests speak for some time, and then let you please enter any questions that you have into the chat box. They'll be sent on to me, and I will go through them and read them out and come back to the two guests to try and answer them, or indeed I might make an attempt to answer some of them myself. But just so you know, as we speak, they're still in the Dáil chambers arguing about the bill, and I think it will probably finish soon. Earlier on, I tried to stop it progressing by trying to put to a vote the idea that the minister should read it for a second time. We were asked, do we agree? And as it happens, there was only me, the Lasceann Comhairle, and the minister in the chamber. And I said, I don't agree, and I want to vote on it. And I was stopped from doing that, but they did have to adjourn the Dáil because the Lasceann Comhairle wasn't sure procedurally what should happen, because apparently it's unheard of to disagree with a bill being read a second time into the Dáil record. Anyway, that's a kind of a minutiae point. The more important point is what's actually going on here. What is the Irish state response to the Commission report? What's the Irish state response to the hundreds of thousands of people who've been affected, touched, and living with the legacy of this? And without further delay, I'm going to introduce the guests. And my first guest is a friend of mine. I regard her as a friend. I've known Deirdre for many years now, and Deirdre Wadding was a councillor for People Before Profit in Wexford. She did us proud. She was an excellent councillor. She decided not to continue on in electoral politics for a period of time, but nevertheless, she has a story to tell, and her own history really speaks volumes. And she's an eloquent speaker, and will take the next 7 to 8 minutes to talk about this issue from a personal and a political point of view. And then after that, I'll move on to introduce our next speaker, and then I'll open it up. But in the meantime, please do make sure that you leave your questions or comments in the chat box. So, Deirdre Wadding, our former councillor in Wexford, you're very welcome, and I thank you very much for joining in and for your courage and honesty. And we'll leave it over to you now.
Hi, I hope I'm unmuted now. Apologies for the sort of coming to you through the shadows, but maybe that's not inappropriate. And, you know, before I say anything, I really want to say that virtually at this moment, I place my hands in the hands of all the women through all the generations who've gone through the mother and baby home system, and to stand in a circle of solidarity with all of those women and with the children living and dead, with those trafficked to America and elsewhere, those who've had happy lives, thankfully, and those who have not. And my own story is that in 1981, at the age of 18, I experienced my first pregnancy. I was a bit of a clueless young woman at the time, and basically the wheels just started turning. And before I kind of knew what was going on, my mother had organised for me to go to Bessborough. And it might be hard for young people, you know, in this day and age to kind of really understand how somebody at 18 would just kind of find themselves in that position, or how they would not fight against it or whatever. But the weight of guilt and shame that, you know, society heaped on us was absolutely immense. And so there was this sense of you had to make amends, you had to do the right thing. And so off I went to Bessborough. And something I don't often mention publicly, although friends and family are aware of it, is the fact that I actually had a second pregnancy, which also resulted in me going to a mother and baby home. And I'm not really at liberty to talk about that because there's a sort of suspended contact with that child. But I delivered my baby in Bessborough, and talking to Breed on the phone earlier on, something kind of really kind of just binged for me. And it was the fact that everything happened in house. There was no going out to hospitals for your checkups. Everything happened in house. There was a nun who was like, you know, doctor, obstetrician, everything rolled into one. And so my baby was delivered, my son was delivered in Bessborough, in a room in the convent. It was a very lonely experience. The one saving grace, I suppose, is the solidarity among the girls who were there, the support that we had for each other. And that's something that exists now between, you know, a lot of the survivors, is that sense of solidarity, that sense of sisterhood and of supporting each other. And I really, really want tonight to not even so much focus on myself, but on the older women who are running out of time. And this 30-year sealing of documents is absolutely just a spit in the face for those women. So for me, it was about banishment. It was about shame. It was about loss and separation and grief that has lasted all my life. And that's despite the fact that I managed to make contact with my son when he was 19 years old. He lives in America now. He's married and he has a son. So I have a grandson. But just like I never got to be his mammy, I will never get to be my grandson's granny. I'm blood. I have a relationship, and I'm so, so thankful for that. It's a blessing. But that loss, that grief, is something that is a lifetime sentence. And being in there, you know, going through that experience, I suppose one of the things is it really makes you think about, you know, not judging people and really understanding people's experiences, because so many people have secret experiences. Being in that big washroom where we washed our clothes and seeing the massive old mangles and the old machines, and really feeling the shadows of the women from the time where they were like brutalized, really incarcerated, and not able to leave. If they left, being brought back by the guards or whatever. I accessed my medical records such as they were during the time I was seeking contact with my son. And I got an A4 sheet, and printed on my sheet was induced for social reasons. Now, there's no medical justification for that. And so it was a very difficult birth. It was my first birth. I didn't know what to expect. An induced birth is more difficult anyway. Any woman who's experienced it knows there's tougher contractions and more likely to have complications. And it was a difficult birth. And I hemorrhaged, and, I wasn't allowed out of bed for 3 days. And during those 3 days, I didn't get to see my son. Nobody brought him to me. I saw him briefly on the third day as my parents came to collect me and take me away and bring me home. And I wasn't to see him again for 19 years. But like I said in a little video I made that some of you may have seen, I'm fortunate I have that contact. There are so many mothers out there who do not know where their children are, who do not know whether they're even alive or dead. And I really want to mention Anne O'Gorman as a case in particular, and Catherine Coffey O'Brien, who has done so much work with Anne and around Bessborough. Women are running out of time, and children have a right to know where they came from. So this bill is actually, completely the opposite of what the Commission told us they were going to do. Like this here, 30th of June 2017, we were brought to a think-in the Westin Hotel. And one of the things that we were told is that it was about us informing the Commission. It was about us actually, driving the investigation. And, I feel that this bill has done exactly the opposite to that. It has actually turned around everything that the survivors and adoptees actually said that they wanted to do on that day. And I have my notes from the day still here. So at the end of the day, the report that went back through the facilitators to that big think-in where we were all brought there, Catherine Zappone was hosting it. And I have number 1 on the feedback from our workshop group. Access to information, all records from all sources or agencies made available unredacted. Original birth certs free of charge. Free counselling, healthcare, addiction counselling, and so on. And a leaflet with information relevant to all dealing with adoption issues, mothers, children's, siblings, etc. But that number 1, access to information, that feedback came not just from the group I was in, but from every single group that day. And I've gone through what we were sent out, the interim report. This is dated the 18th of September 2016. And I've really combed through it, and I don't find anywhere where it was explained to us that the material that we were sharing, although we were told, obviously, there would be confidentiality, that it would be sealed away for 30 years. So there's 2 issues at play here. On the one hand, yes, we have to look at the GDPR implications and what's required under the 2004 Commission of Investigation. But primarily here, we need to be looking at what the women need, what the women and the adult children need. And what we all need is access to our own information. Children who are now grown, who were either forcibly or through social reasons or whatever reasons, removed from their mothers shortly after birth, or in some cases later, they have a right to know who their parents are. And on that note, like something that really still kind of sits with me, I wanted to put the baby's father's name on the birth cert, and I wasn't allowed. So I had to write down father unknown. That's a really difficult thing. That was really difficult for me to have to do that. You weren't permitted to write the father's name on the birth cert. And this was 1981. So although it wasn't the Dark Ages, it felt like the Dark Ages. So This bill is not working for survivors. It's not working for adoptees. Anybody involved in this issue wants to have full access. And that's what has to happen. And as far as I'm concerned, the government is trying to pull a fast one here. They're trying to rush it through. They're not giving adequate time for this to be thrashed out. They're not giving the survivors time to really actually look at this and see what's being put through. I'm in touch with a lot of survivors groups. I'm in touch with a lot of amazing women like Terry Harrison and Maureen Sullivan, and as I said, Catherine Coffey O'Brien. And the feedback that's coming through all those groups is nobody wants this. So I hear Micheál Martin saying things like, oh, advocacy groups are telling us this is what. No, advocacy groups, if they're saying that, are not speaking for the women. Look in the survivors groups, speak to that huge body of women and adult adoptees, and you will find that this is not what people want. Give us access, give women like Anne O'Gorman closure. Let her know whether her child is alive or dead. And if she is not alive, tell her where she is. We need criminal investigations here. We need the burial sites opened up. We need to know exactly what happened to the children. Thank you.
Reg is a wee bit caught up.
Things seem to have just frozen there a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that Gino is the next speaker to come in. I don't know if the public are hearing this. I suppose my plea is just everybody just get onto this, get onto your TDs, get onto your councillors, get onto the MEPs, because don't forget, there are people in America, Australia, in the UK who were born here in mother and baby homes who are affected by this as well.
Yeah. Deirdre, I might speak.
I think, Gino, go ahead, but the only thing is I'm not sure the public are hearing you. It would be great if someone could comment in and just let us know. Yeah, breathe.
Look, I'll go, and if I have to repeat myself, I have no problem. My name is Councillor Regina Boyle. I'm based in Sligo, and I have two stories relating to the same issue. The first one was a relative of mine, very close, who was in a mother and baby home. And after having a baby and having to stay in the mother and baby home for a number of months afterwards, she woke up one morning to find out her baby was gone. And the reasons that the nuns had given her was she never had a child, you know. Now, this is a woman who's after giving birth to a baby, and then to be told she never had one. And she left the mother and baby home. She searched for her son. For a number of years, she moved to England and worked and continually sent letters to the appropriate people and never even received a reply. So she had to go through all the stuff that went on. And I can't comment on it because I wasn't there, but some of the stuff that you read, the stories were so disgusting, and it's very hard to listen to when you're speaking to a survivor. After 55 years later, she ended up getting a phone call from her son, who ended up making a good living for himself. And he was notified that he was adopted by his parents. He never knew. So when he contacted his biological mother, the emotions that went through her and all of us, because she's after living with this heartache for 55 years and never lived, or she never thought she'd live to see the day that she would meet him. And as it turned out, the nuns had taken the baby to an adopted family and told the family that the mother had died. Now that sometimes I can't understand why, when vulnerable people turn for help, that the people they turned to help for were the ones that abused them. It was a case that when they met, he had got the 50 plus letters that she had sent, and they remain in very close contact. And unfortunately, not everybody gets a happy story or a happy ending to it. I have an issue with the files being sealed because, as Deirdre said, it should be a criminal investigation. I believe that the stuff that we're sweeping under the rug now is only to pass the buck to somebody else in 30 years' time. If you go back to last year, the Ryan Commission, that's the second part of my story. My dad was raised in an orphanage in Sligo here, and went through a very tough emotional and physical time. It took him a while to get used to not knowing his family. When he grew up, he was very annoyed and aggressive that all the other boys were finding their parents. And anytime he went to try and find out any information, he was told he was special. Now, whether special means that you get beaten by a stick or you get locked in a closet for a couple of hours, and the day of your communion when you're locked in a closet after being beaten, these are the things that affect you for life. And in return, they affect his family. And my father passed away in 2015 due to sudden adult death syndrome, which was an onset of an irregular heartbeat. Now, the problem I have with the files being covered up is he never knew his medical history. And if he was given his files that he could go through his medical history, he would have found out that irregular heartbeat runs in his family and sudden adult death syndrome was hereditary. Now, he could have got some proper precautions in place. There's a sleeve you get to put over your heart that if your heart stops, it kickstarts it back. All these things he was never told. After my father passed away, I went in search, looking for his family, only to be told he was brought here in the middle of the night. Nobody ever visited him, and he was not wanted. Now, the longer we dug, or the further we dug, the more times the information changed. We found out who brought him up to Sligo. He had numerous visitors, but there was never a record kept. When it turns that I think it was 10 shillings to keep a child in an orphanage a month, it turned out that my dad's mother ended up paying £50 a month for 2 years. Now, after 4 years of searching, myself and my brother found my dad's mother, still alive miraculously. She's a beautiful woman, 88 years old. And all the stories that we were told over the years turned out not to be true. The information we received was so wrong that it affected other families. We went searching for the wrong people. My dad was taken from his mother the minute she had him. She took a seizure after she had him and just never seen him again. She was sent home, and she was sent a letter from a priest saying that send £50 a month and that will look after him. 2 years later, she receives another letter from the same priest saying he's after been adopted, so there's no need to send any more money. Now, this is a single mother. Ireland in the 50s wasn't a desirable place. She was a vulnerable person. I suppose she needed the help that a lot of women still need now. She moved away. She never remarried or had another relationship. She just couldn't live with the shame or the fact she had to give up her child. So when we met her late last year, she was at the opinion that he was adopted, and she was surprised to hear he wasn't, as she had given money and received a letter saying he was adopted. Now, it was hard enough to tell her that he had passed away, but then for her to say the only reason I never made contact was because he was with a loving family. Now, if you class a loving family as out on the streets with your friends and nowhere to go or living in a tent, when the church had received so much money to look after him, but never in turn recompensated him, they could have given him a good start in life. With the money they were receiving in 1957 to buy a house was only £40. They were receiving £50 a month. And instead, my dad had to go through a life which was intolerable. When they went to school, they had to walk the other side of the road. They weren't allowed to make contact with the other children because they weren't normal children. The physical, emotional, and sexual abuse that they went through is unimaginable, especially when you think that it's a little child who was being hurt and abused. And I think with this bill, the way it's being fast-tracked, the people that did all this abuse and damage to families is still around, and they're able to live their lives while other people have went from broken home to failed marriage to failed relationship, where they never received the aftercare that they deserved. So I was on to, as Deirdre says, my local councillors, and I was on to my MEP. I definitely hope that this bill doesn't pass. It's an injustice to all the women that have survived these homes. It's an injustice to the people who have not survived. And I think it's time that we stop sweeping our dirty shame or dirty secret, which is the Catholic Church, under the rug. I would also like to thank Deirdre for sharing her story. I understand that it's very hard. It's a heartbreaking story to listen to, and also People Before Profit for giving me the platform to speak. So I'd like to thank you all very much for listening.
Okay, I'm first of all apologize for the mess up I'm having yet again on StreamYard with my phone. Just to say briefly, I tried earlier on to do it on the various gadgets I have here, but it wasn't working for me. So if this falls down, I will leave it to the two of you to continue the discussion. I just ask the producer here, Shiva, if she could send us or intervene and call out some questions and some comments, because if I open the chat box, I can't get back in again. So apologies for that. Would you care to read one out to us, Shiva, or type it up on the page? Okay, I have Aisling Kyo. It was so inhumane and wrong on multiple levels in the past. This is 2020. There needs to be light shone upon this, not locked away. Okay, well, I'll tell you something interesting that while I wait for the next comment. Thank you, Aisling, for that comment. And you're dead right. One of the interesting things I found out about this idea of locking the files away in a briefing with the minister yesterday, I asked him exactly what is intended to be locked away for 30 years. And he gave me a list, the evidence, the statements, the witnesses' statements, some documents and records from various homes. And I asked him, are all the records from the various homes already out in the archives that they can be viewed? And he said no. He said, in fact, I asked him, do you know everything that is to be locked up? He said, I don't. So the minister is prepared to go ahead and push this through without knowing exactly what is getting locked away for 30 years. And that may well, and I suspect does include, records and files from institutions that the state is rushing to protect. And nobody could be blamed if they call it a cover-up or whatever, you know, the secrecy of it and the intent of the state, because we have witnessed throughout a long period of time the estate attempting to cover up, to obfuscate, to lock away things, not to tell the truth. And at every turn when they do it, they are covering up for the church and for their own institutions. Shiva, could you put us up another comment? I want to thank Aisling Kyo for that one. Or a question maybe that we could have try and get Deirdre and Gino back in. Okay. Is there specific pressure coming from some quarters, aside from the usual tendency of the Irish state to defer to the church, rushing this through? Is there specific pressure that you are aware of? I gather this degree of cover-up was unexpected, and in light of the ongoing campaign from several quarters, AFM, APA, etc., I can't fully understand why the haste with this particular bill. If you are aware of specific parties exerting pressure on this bill, it would be helpful to know. And that's from Owen Flaherty. Thank you, Owen, for that question. Well, I certainly don't know of specific pressure. What I would say as a political activist, as somebody who's been around for many decades and with all of the previous investigations of church and state and collusion, and been through the many campaigns to give us same-sex marriage, divorce, proper abortion, all the rest of it, is that there is strong history of collusion between the church and state. That's no revelation. The organisations that exist and who's pressuring who, I cannot say. But I have no doubt that there are elements of the state, not politicians in the Dáil, them as well, but there are elements of the Irish state who are deeply wedded and embedded with the Catholic Church. They are possibly top civil servants, they are possibly legal advisors, but there is somebody pulling the strings here. I mean, I'm no fan of the Green Party, but after all, on the back of the desire for change, he would be seen as a liberal and as an egalitarian. And the minister with that record is now willing to say that he must do this, that we've no choice, that the archives must be locked up or else they'll be destroyed. But where and who is going to destroy them? And so I put to him tonight, are you telling us that at midnight on the 30th of October, this archive will self-destruct, or that it'll be put into a brazier with dozens of civil servants standing around tearing up pages and throwing them in a fire? And he needs to explain to us where in the law it says it will be destroyed, how will it be destroyed? I don't believe him. But nobody wants it locked up, and therefore if he doesn't lock it up, he needs to show and prove to us how he can claim that it'll be destroyed. And, you know, to answer the last questioner, personally, I believe there are elements of collusion deeply embedded in the state with the church that are still rooted, and we need to uproot that. I have a question here. I think it's a question. Oh yeah, Senan Short. I am an adoptee and I still have no access to information regarding my family. I don't even have a proper birth cert. I don't have any rights to know anything, and I was just fobbed off by St. Patrick's when I asked. Deirdre and Gino, Deirdre first, would you like to come back in on any of the comments or questions so far? Yeah,
my son who's in the States came across this recently because he's been working out there, and he was processing a green card application, and they wouldn't accept the adoption cert as like his identity, so he was on to me to see if I had an original birth cert for him, which of course I don't, because I wouldn't have been given that. But unless it was an illegal adoption, a false registration, you should be able to get your birth cert. Like if you have the place of birth, like if you were born in St. Patrick's or, you know, Dublin, and you have the date of birth, you should be actually able to get a birth cert. But the problem is not everybody was legally registered or got a legal adoption cert, because we know that there were the illegal adoptions or false registrations, which basically were the children were registered as if they were the natural biological child of the adoptive couple. So we'd need to know what the situation is in terms of his registration as to whether he could access a birth cert or not, but he may be able to.
Okay, thanks, Deirdre. I also want to see if Gino would like to come in on this. Gino, you've been quite an experience trying to track down your father's mum. I'm so glad for you that you found her.
Yeah. About that, Senan, it depends where you were born, actually. We never had a birth cert from my dad, and we still don't. We had searched from pillar to post, from literally Sligo, Roscommon, Cavan, Monaghan, Kiltee, and Dublin. I actually went to Musselburgh in Scotland, and I also went to New York based on information that the church had given us. And again, it turns out all to be wrong. But sometimes children were born in England and they were sent back home by a priest or brought back home by a priest. So maybe that could be a protocol for you to check. And I suppose why is this happening is another question that I'm after getting a lot of over the last couple of weeks. And again, I just see it as an opportunity to rid Ireland of its past, trying to get rid of all the wrongs that they did, and just try to cover it up. I believe that this should be an education taught in schools where people understand what happened in the past. And I just think one of the things people always seem to forget was, if you look at a lot of people that were raised in mother and baby homes or orphanages, they always seem to live a tougher life. They never got the break that other people got, or they never got that small bit of luck when their luck was down. So it's always one of those hard things. And the break I think that they deserve is for this information not to be sealed. I think that's the only silver lining you can give somebody, to give them the information that they deserve. So that'd be my take on it.
Good point, Gino. Thanks very much. There was a very nice message came in just a while ago on Joanne Neary to Deirdre. Thank you for her courage and talking about her mother's experience in St. Road in 1976. Her mother still struggles to speak openly about her experiences. She was made scrub floors and right up until she was in labour. She and many others birthed alone and were harassed to give up their babies. You're an amazing woman, Deirdre. Thank you for sharing your story. And just while Shiva puts up the next question, I just say to everybody there, this meeting is organised by the for-profit. We're very privileged to have these two fine public reps speak on our behalf. And we would like for you to consider joining us. And it's very, there should be a bar will appear towards the end of the meeting to allow you to know how to get involved with people before profit. And if you ask me why, I would say basically to you, there are few parties left in this country who proudly, openly, and at every step and claim that what needs to happen is a separation of church and state, and we need to ditch the legacy of the last almost 100 years when this state engaged in a counter-revolution against women and babies from the time it was founded. And we need that separation, and we will campaign for it and continue to fight for it right up to the bitter end. So do you want to put up another question there for me, Shiva, please? And I can call it out and come back to our two speakers. From Elaine Kiernan, how can they justify sealing these documents? What are the government saying is the reason behind it? Okay, so briefly, there was legislation brought in here in 2004 by the then Minister McDowell. People may remember Michael McDowell of the Progressive Democrats, but there was nothing progressive or democratic about what he did. But the legislation was, he says, designed to protect archives. Now, one would ask, why do we have a National Archive Service if we need to bring in such legislation? But in that legislation, there is an article in it that says, once a commission or an investigation is completed, the documents should be taken handed over to the minister and sealed and protected. And that is the legislation they're using. But as we have all repeatedly said to the minister today, and in our amendments, which we'll be going through tomorrow night, all he has to do is put to us a simple amendment to the 2004 legislation, deleting that necessity. We will support it, and that would get rid of that sort of archaic justification for locking away the documents. And he also, as I said earlier on, needs to explain to us how it is or how it will happen that such documents could be destroyed if they're not locked away. I hope that answers your question, Elaine, and we will pursue that amendment tomorrow night. If there's any other questions or any other, does Deirdre or Gina want to come back in on any of the issues? I'll leave it up to you, Deirdre, first.
Yeah, I just really wanted to say hello to Elaine and thank her for being there. I know Elaine. And yeah, this, as we were discussing earlier, this notion that everything will somehow disappear and be destroyed on the 30th of October if we don't suddenly rush this bill through. like that doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold water. And so, you know, I really thank you, Breed, and you know, the other TDs in the Dáil who are pushing to get amendments put in here. I just see Laura Angela Collins coming up there as well, and that's something I actually wanted to say earlier. I know the story about Laura's mother, and with Catherine Coffey O'Brien's mother as well. There is a particular aspect with the traveller community here as well, where children were just taken, you know, literally taken from homes. So I think we need to have a really broad approach to this and protect everybody and make sure that we do not repeat history by actually hiding things away. I think it is absolutely essential now. We've come this far. And as you've said, Breed, we have some progressive legislation now. You know, we got repeal, we got same-sex marriage. Let us not consign this absolutely horrendous aspect of Irish history and what was done to the women and children of Ireland. Let us not hide this away for 30 years. I will fight tooth and nail, actually, for this. And I have my information. I know where my children are, but I want this for everyone. I want justice for all the women, and especially the older women.
Thanks for that. Thanks very much, Deirdre. Do you want to add anything to that, Gino?
Yeah, again, I'd just like to say how brave it is of Deirdre to share her stories and everybody else who shared their story over the last couple of weeks, and I will stand in solidarity with anybody. My dad was a survivor from an abusive institution, and my relative was a survivor from a mother and baby home who at the end got her rewards, but it took so long and it was so wrong. So just that as a People Before Profit councillor in Sligo, I will stand with everybody in Ireland behind this. I'd like to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak about this.
Good on you, Gino. Do you want to put up another question there for us? We have 10 minutes left, and I think we should use the audio as much as possible. If you can put up any other questions there, Eva, that would be very useful. Just an observation I'd like to make. I mean, I absolutely am sure that if it wasn't for the lockdown and the COVID crisis we're in the middle of now, absolutely sure that the streets outside would have been thronged with people from all over Ireland and probably even abroad over this legislation had it been normal times. And in a way, this suits the government, doesn't it, to use a crisis to their favour because they can't face the ire of the people on the streets. But given the level of lobbying, campaigning and emailing that we have seen, unprecedented in this Dáil, I have no doubt that the streets are thousands and thousands of people, which would put huge pressure on the government not to do this. But as Deirdre said earlier on, keep it up. We've all day tomorrow to go through this bill. They're dedicating hours to it. So keep up the pressure, hardening the emails, making phone calls to your local TDs, etc., to ensure that they don't allow this go through. Do we have another question, Shiva, that we can put up for the last few minutes? We'll take one other. No. Okay. Problem is I can't go into the chat because then I won't get back into the broadcast studio. Deirdre, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I don't know if you're seeing the questions coming up, Breed. I saw David Kinsella coming in there, and David Kinsella basically saying that he got a response from the HSE, basically saying, we have decided to refuse you the documents you require. So he's like banging his head off a brick wall, but determined to continue to seek to get the documents. There's a question showing up on my screen here, which you may not be able to see. It's for you. The amendments proposed yesterday by Min O'Gorman are not enough. Does Breed think the bill, as amended by government amendments, will pass tomorrow night? Or is there any chance of opposition amendments being accepted? Is there anything we as citizens can do at this point? From Katrina O'Torna.
Well, thank you, Katrina, for your question. Roderick O'Gorman's amendments, some of them are helpful. So, for example, when I spoke to Deirdre earlier before this meeting, she described a think-in that was conducted by Catherine Sapone when this commission was first founded. Catherine Sapone was then the minister, had the minister Roderick O'Gorman now holds, and she brought together a group of survivors into a hotel to sit and have a think tank about how this procedure should go forward. And when they were all there, as Deirdre said to me, they all expressed two things very clearly. One was that they wanted their names to be attached to the evidence. They didn't want their names redacted in the public report. And the other was the other issue was what did I just see now?
Tusla.
The other issue was Tusla, that people felt very uneasy about Tusla. Now, so there are a huge amount of amendments coming in for the opposition on those two things. But what Roderick O'Gorman's amendment does is that he is actually keeping the commission in existence until the end of February next year. And he's keeping it in existence to allow people who want their name on the report or on their files, not redacted, to contact Tusla, get the names on their files inserted into it. But that doesn't mean that. So it's not nearly good enough. He's attempting to sweeten things. He's attempting to lighten things. But the only thing that will sweeten or lighten what's happening here is to retract the bill. And at the very least, give it more time for discussion and more time for the citizens of this country and those affected by it, even if they don't live in this country, to mobilise and to begin to campaign to stop this happening. We don't want the file sealed away for 30 years, and we don't want the secrecy that is attached to this report. If there are people who want their names in the report, their names should be in the report, attached to their witness statements. And the question of Tusla's involvement is very, very difficult because people do not trust them. They have got a great record of being open and honest and timely with people, or indeed with freedom of information requests. So we've a pile of amendments in. But if Roderick O'Gorman's amendments are accepted and the bill is then amended and put to a vote, if the Green Party, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and the 10 independents that are from their gene pool stick together like they have done on most pieces of legislation up to now, then it will pass. Because unfortunately, you have that majority Conservative bloc making the decisions. We've a big opposition, we've a varied opposition, we've a good left opposition, but unfortunately, they have the majority. And shame on the Green Party in particular for being the mudguard for these two Conservative blocs that have dominated this state and actually carry the responsibility ultimately for this legacy, because it was either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael in power throughout the last almost 100 years now. So we're faced a big challenge, and that's why I do think people need to get political and they need to get active and they need to get stuck into and into political parties. And we would love to have you on board if you want to fight that agenda and see the ultimate separation. I hope that answers your question. But yeah, we're probably looking at a grim result tomorrow, unless we can really keep piling on the pressure, and unless O'Gorman does agree with us and pulls back from this brinkmanship and stops trying to force this bill through. Are there any other questions there, Deirdre, that you want to read out or you can read out in the last few minutes? Is Deirdre there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted? Yeah, I see there is a question from Alan Kish there. Can Breed, Gino or Deirdre talk about the class aspect of the laundry's home system? I don't know what it was like, obviously, in former times, in the older days. I do know in my own time, for instance, I was coming in as a trainee teacher. I know that myself and there was another girl who was around the same time as me. We became good friends. She was a Montessori trainee teacher. We were excused from a certain amount of chores and given a basement room where we could study because my child was born in June, so it was coming up. We had missed college exams, and we had like one shot at the repeat exams for first year in college. We were facilitated in actually studying and had to do our chores like in the evenings and weekends and do the nursery work and clean the chapel and stuff like that. I would say there was a slightly maybe harsher treatment. Like we weren't in the days of the brutality, but I think there was a definite class bias. But I don't know in terms of like figures of how many, let's say, girls were in there from different kinds of backgrounds or whatever. I know that there was a kind of thing for me where there were nuns in the family. My dad had sisters who were nuns, and I remember there was a nun who was very kind to me, and she kind of went, "Oh, you want some of the girls have a chip on their shoulders about nuns. You understand because you have nuns in the family." So I don't know, but I feel that there was, there would have been a class element to it in terms of how people were viewed or treated or so on. And I think maybe Gino in his research might have come across more than that. But, talking to survivors, and especially somebody asked about I don't know if you saw it, Breed, about the intergenerational thing. Say children who were born in mother and baby homes ending up in industrial schools. And I know of a number of people where that has been the case, and who then possibly went on and ended up back in mother and baby homes themselves, having been born in mother and baby homes. That definitely happened, and it probably happened more so with working class families, and with I know in certain cases with traveller families as well. So I don't know if yourself or Gino want to come in on that aspect of it.
Gino, I'll give you the opportunity there.
Well, again, I was only going on information I was given, by a relative and my dad. So if you're on about the days of brutality, my dad lived through that in a mother and baby, or in an orphanage where it was so severe that he literally had a scar on the back of his head as maybe an 8-year-old, where he was put into the old bathrooms and beaten. There was a time where they went on a school trip, and he came back and he took a bag of potatoes that the person that was looking after him wanted. Again, you're only a child, and he was beaten for 3 hours because of it. So kind of the brutality stage my dad lived through, and I know it was hard for him to tell me. And after he passed, the more I researched, more stories I heard about what went on. And I think that's one of the main reasons that I'm frustrated. The bill came up so quick. It was like the one last year, cover up the child abuse, seal it away for 75 years. The Ryan Commission, it's things like these they put out at 12 o'clock at night. You might see it or you mightn't see it. I know when I seen it, it was nearly 12 or half 12. I was like, how again can they be turning their back on the most vulnerable in society? These were the people who, as I said earlier, turned looking for help. A vulnerable child, a vulnerable mother who needed help, support, and love. It was unmarried mothers that had no choice but to give up their children or to be put into a home. When I was pregnant, sorry, when my mother was pregnant with me, 1984, they were getting married in December. I was born in March. But on a visit up to the Nazareth, they suggested to put me and my mother into a mother and baby home. And she was like, no. And my father said, no, I know what went on. I seen all what you do. So I think it's one of the things for me is that people don't forget, if these records are seen, what happened. And any chance I get to point it out, I will, because when you're a vulnerable person and you need that help and support, you don't get it. One of the things I tried with Catherine's opponent last year, it's a bit of a strange one, was a DNA database for people born and raised in mother and baby homes and institutions or orphanages, a private one, because a recent story that I had heard at the time was where a person went in to an orphanage. He thought on his own. He ended up going up with 2 brothers who he never seen since. And I think if the option was there for people, because there's a lot more family out there than people think, if people were given the opportunity to privately have their own DNA database funded by the government, as long as you could prove that you were a child of an institution or born in an institution or raised, it gives you the option to find people. And I know for a fact there's people out there looking, you know. You just have to get lucky and find that person. And if there's a DNA database, I'm sure it'd clear up a lot of things. And my last point, Deirdre, just as you were on about nuns, it was a strange one for me because the further I went to Cavan and Monaghan, the deeper I got into rural Ireland, and the priests were so welcoming, believe it or not, and were so open that they're like, I think one of them was at the age of 91 and he gave me any information that I needed. Where in Sligo here in town, when I went to the bishop at the time and I went to the Bishop of Cavan, I was refused and I was nearly sent a legal letter to leave them alone because I was looking for information, you know. So it's amazing the further you go and the older the priests were, how helpful they were.
Okay, there's another question.
I think that's another thing, the variance between the different adoption agencies as well. You know, there were different age limits at which they would start maybe send forward in a letter. You know, they just seemed to have autonomy, like there was no kind of standardizing regulations around the different adoption agencies. They all seem to be able to make up their own rules, you know. So that's the kind of thing that needs to be addressed as well, and people getting fobbed off and getting told false information, like Gino says, you know, they got all kinds of lies. You know, I mean, people have a right to their information, and it just needs to be as simple as that. That just needs to be done. And like I'm seeing all the, I don't know if Breed's seeing, but all the comments and messages coming up. Mary Donovan wanting to be the voice for her mother. Good for you, Mary. And I'm sure your mother is looking down and aware that you are her voice. Paul Mahan, if the records are sealed, is there a chance to overturn it, or is it a done deal? I think we need to head it off at the pass, would be my thinking. But Breed, what do you think?
Well, can I just
Breed frozen again?
About sorry, can I go back to the question?
Okay, I just thought you were frozen again. That's grand. Go on.
Okay, I just want to go. There's another question, and I think is a good one. I want to, and then we'll try and wrap it up. But on the question of was the laundry system, did it have a bias? I would say absolutely yes, and I think there are tons of evidence out there to show that the laundry system, the mother and baby homes, the industrial schools were used by the Irish state, and this is important, going back to the role of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they were used by the Irish state to deal with the question of poverty and of families that the church itself wanted to control and morally keep a structure on, but it also allowed the state off the hook in terms of taking responsibility for children. And obviously, that flies in the face of the proclamation which said we treat all of the children of the nation equally. They were not treated equally. There was a cohort in this country, working class, poor, neglected people, and Deirdre mentioned several times the traveller community, who were absolutely abused by them and who gave free labour for life to making profits for nuns and for institutions that used them to work extremely hard. So there was a class bias definitely inserted into it. There were families, obviously, who used mother and baby homes, and there were better off people who used them. But by and large, it was a way of dealing with poverty, and often children were taken from families even after they were born, and young girls in particular were dumped in these places as a way of, you know, hiding the sort of negligence and disgrace of the state and the church combined. There's a good question in here, I think, that we'll finish on. If records are sealed, is there a chance to overturn it, or is it a done deal? And that's coming from Paul Mahan. That's a very good question, Paul, and I really don't know if there's a way of repealing the legislation brought in by McDougall in 2004 that, you know, said that these records from commissions should be sealed for 30 years. There's a way of repealing that. Would it apply retrospectively to records that are hidden away? But you can be sure we'll do our damnedest, and if we continue to campaign together to get active and to, you know, continue push them on the question of the separation of church and state, it is a demand we can campaign for. But let's hope this doesn't happen tomorrow. I think everybody should watch the debate, should tune in, but please don't forget to keep emails and the phone calls flying particularly to your TDs, and particularly to any TDs who are in the establishment parties, because they have the majority of this House, and that's the unfortunate reality. And we need to turn that on its head and make sure that we move towards a future where people who stand for equality, for justice, for the separation of church and state, for transparency, and for utterly changing the way children are treated in Ireland, that people join parties that stand for that, like People Before Profit, and get stuck in to the fight. I just want to end by, because we're over an hour now on live, I think it's probably enough. I just want to end thanking from the bottom of my heart both Regina Boyle and Deirdre Wadding for their participation and their honesty and their very, very moving and interesting testimonies of that form the shape of this debate. I'm sorry about my techie lack of techie skills and the equipment that I have, which is pretty poor, but I'm delighted to have hosted this meeting, and we will do our best tomorrow to fight like hell for this change. People should also get in touch with journalists and with, as I say, all sorts of local politicians and establishment politicians to try and really frighten them that this is not going to be in their favour to push this any further. And to all the women and children of Ireland who have gravely suffered the abuse and the degrading that they have put up with over the decades, this is a salute to you, and let's hope we can win tomorrow. Thank you very much for participating, and we might do this again depending on the outcome. All right. Thanks everybody, and good night.
Thank you for having us and for the opportunity. And I send out my love to all women and all the adoptees and everyone affected by this issue. We'll all stand in solidarity